of developing an exciting curatorial idea and creating a strong exhibition or program? And the other way around, can too little theoretical backbone water down an exhibition's potential? How does a curator create new discourse through exhibition making? These are just a few of the questions we would like to discuss tonight. And I would like to give the floor and the microphone to Wade Wallerstein, one of this year's coaching curators, actually the first time. Maybe Wade, you haven't introduced yourself as a participant in the program. Maybe you start with just a brief introduction to our online audience also, and then I hope you can respond to the questions and the subjects I just described. Hi, welcome Wade.
Oh, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for having me. It's great to be here at the Full Spectrum Curatorship event. My name is Wade Wallerstein. I'm an anthropologist, a strategist, and a curator. I'm the co-director of Digital Art Gallery Transfer based out of Los Angeles, California. And I'm also the technology and events curator for the Consulate of Canada in San Francisco. I run a media arts online page called Silicon Ballet that focuses on experimental and feed-based curation within social media environments. This question of academia and art is one that's really close to me because as a digital arts practitioner, someone who's focusing solely on curating within the virtual space, so many of my colleagues have come into this field because of exclusion from academic spaces, because of lack of access to funding, to space, and even to education. You know, one of my really close collaborators, you know, has a BA in sales or marketing and works as an insurance salesman by day, and by night he's an incredible digital art curator thinking about how he can push the boundaries of what post-internet means. You know, but what has emerged as a result of that exclusion has been a rich community of academic learners who are operating on the margins, who are operating on an outsider context, who do the reading on their own through free PDFs that they find online. And there are starting to be small seeds of communities who have largely been excluded from those environments, who are learning how they can participate, and, you know, learning the terminology, learning the lingo, you know, diving into terms like Anthropocene and digital ontologies and trying to understand them in a way that is colloquial and makes sense. I can name some of my, at the same time as this, I think access for curators to really rigorous peer-reviewed scholarship is tenuous at times. And a lot of my co-conspirators and collaborators and colleagues have gone on to publish their own scholarship on their own platforms using their own rigorous methodologies of research. Offsite Project in the United Kingdom just launched an amazing piece of scholarship on curation in virtual white cubes that they just released on their own Medium page. I can also note Doreen Ríos, who's here with us, who publishes work on her own website, Antimateria Digital. So there's so much possibility for peer review to come about in some of these alternative contexts to the Institute and to the Academy. And there have even been some more formal structures that have been created to provide those kinds of experiences. Dark Study in the United States, run by Caitlin Cherry and Nora Khan, is an excellent example. Another great example is School of the Damned, run out of London, which is an alternative MFA program where artists and curators have kind of come together to do a community source and a crowdsourced development program that provides a sort of honorary degree that, while may not be recognized by a more traditional audience, is certainly recognized by me and kind of folks from a younger generation who believe in those things. So those are kind of the propositions that I'd love to leave on the table as we start off. And, you know, again, thank you for having me here. Arjan, you're muted.
Now I'm unmuted. Thanks, Wade, for your statements. We asked two of the other coaching curators in the program to also respond. And let's now jump to Angelique Spaninks of MU. Angelique, take it away.
We're back again, and it's nice to meet you, Wade. You were the only one missing so far, so that's good. I did think a little bit about the question about academia and art, and I always end up like, what is academia exactly? Because there are many ideas about what it is and how theoretical, or is it just the humanities, or is it the whole of science involved with art? And as soon as these kinds of definition questions rise within my brain, I usually think about it as being as opening it up as wide as possible. And I agree with Wade that there are many ways that artists and can define their own academic way of research and thinking and connecting to theory, but also to practice and interrelating that. So for me, it's not a question of separation. I think they always touch, and I must say that in my own practice, it always touches in very different ways. Of course, when making publications, we always look for the scholars and the knowledge that lives out there, and sometimes it's related to purely theoretical research. For instance, in the Real Feelings book, we got Antonio Damasio, like the world-renowned neuroscience and robotics professor, to write a piece. But also Cecile B. Evans, as an artist, writes about her take on how emotion and technology are intertwining. And I think both are just as valuable to have in a book like that. And that's where the connection happens. So as a curator, you can also add to bringing these worlds together and thinking about how to bridge it, and also to connect it to the exhibition you're making and the works you're presenting. So that's an important thing. For me, academia, I always stretch it up to collaborations with scientists, also the more data scientists, being it in the digital realm, but also in bioart and design that we work a lot in. And we have a very interesting, like the BioArt and Design Award, the BAD Award, that we yearly host, which also connects scientists to artists and designers, and having them operate on an equal level. And I think that's also an important thing to take care of, that academia and artists are not at different levels or anything, but that they are able, even speaking different languages, to collaborate on an equal level and to find each other's practices in that and each other's qualities in that. And maybe it's also a question of specialism and general or a more intuitive way of working and connecting these worlds. So to my opinion, it's very interesting to, as a curator, to connect the two. That's my presentation. My ideas.
Thanks a lot for that. So in the third curator that prepared at least a little statement, or we could listen to her opinion merging into the discussion, is Paulien Dresscher, curator of the Dutch Film Festival and then the interactive program that is kind of the new media digital arts section of the Dutch Film Festival. Paulien, I'm very curious about your opinions or statements here.
Thank you, Arjan. Officially, since this year, we call it the Digital Culture Program. So no more interactive. So also things that are not interactive can be part of this program. That was always the main problem of the name interactive. But thanks, Wade. Thanks, Angelique. I think as we have heard now, we can already be aware of how broad this theme of academia versus art can be. I have a few angles here from the top of my head. The first one is indeed what Angelique already touched upon. Is academia, what is academia? Within academia, there is still, I feel, a big distinction between science and humanities. And there is the first gap, maybe that's still needs work, so to say. I think a lot of things being developed or thought about or criticized in the science department could benefit from start reading whatever happens in humanities more closely, maybe. I feel that a lot of things are being developed on that end of the spectrum, sometimes are really oblivion about what we the people think about things are being developed, and there maybe artists and artistic practices can be of any help to maybe bridge concepts, ideas, consequences of, well, technology basically. The other thing, what is interesting, I think, is that since a couple of years, at least in Europe, but I think it's worldwide, you see more and more this artistic research coming, well, in the front. And artistic research somehow, yeah, has nice overlapping, I think, with academic research. They basically try to do the same things. They try to get knowledge. They try to understand stuff. Just the way they are doing this is different, right? The academics usually use words, use language, and artists and designers use, besides words, usually mainly other forms of expression. And there you get some kind of a freedom of translation that can be really inspirational. Because if you are not very clear and specific in how you talk about your ideas, you know, that there do come there to existence certain islands of understanding without a very clear definition, and there become clouds of interpretation. And I think in these clouds of interpretation, in between different disciplines, there you can try to understand each other, but you also can try to come to new forms of understanding. I think that's quite interesting. From my personal point of view, or for my daily practice even, is that one of the things I'm doing is teaching at the university within humanities. And at the University of Utrecht here, we just started this initiative. It's called Meet the Makers. And on a yearly basis, we do invite the artist who was talking in the conference, speaking in the conference of the Netherlands Film Festival. We extend the invitation from that conference towards the student university context, and they go into a deeper discussion with the students and the professors from the University of Utrecht. And there you actually literally see how both academia focused researchers are diving basically into the same concepts and are interested in the same concepts as the artists. And because they're coming from different angles, they approach the questions in a kind of a different way. And I find it extremely interesting and very inspirational as well, because there are always little misunderstandings, but those misunderstandings usually open up to new possibilities and new understandings of things. And then and now I'm already a little bit ahead of myself, because this will be part of the topic of my talk for tomorrow, is that within this current state of technology, and that the research part of the artistic practice is getting larger and larger, that technologies are getting more and more complex, that the artistic signature is getting less unique, in the sense that there are more people collaborating, working on things. They are working together on stuff. There are research groups, that research becomes part of the final product. It's not just working towards one final form of presentation, but it seems that the artwork also entails everything that happens before the artwork is there. And the final state of the artwork is not clear anymore either. It keeps evolving because maybe there's a next exhibition, but there are new understandings around the corner and during the development, and things keep changing and evolving. And that's, creates a very intriguing process, I think, where research and art is feeding into each other and building a new entity somehow.
Thanks a lot for that, for the thoughts. Maybe Katerina Gregos, also one of the coaching curators, you would like to respond, or maybe you also have something to add, and then we can open it up to a group. And Florian already raised his hands, then we'll continue with Florian after that. But maybe first Katerina.
Thank you, Arjan. I just want to add a few things to what has been said. Yes, the academic and the art fields do relate, and I would say in the last 10 or even more years, more and more so. As has already been said, the rise of research-based practices is one way and one field in which this has happened. And I believe that this has actually really enriched the field of actually from sort of age-old questions of formalism, modernism, what have you, and of course other more important questions such as post-colonial critique, gender, feminist studies, and cultural studies in general. I don't think, as I think someone implied, that the academic is only limited to the scientific. I think academia applies to anthropology, to ethnography, to sociology, to post-colonial critique, to many, many other things. So the field of academia, field of art, I think has expanded also exponentially in the last couple of years. How and how do they touch? Certainly they touch in terms of research, the content of research. I think where they might diverge is in the methodologies, because research from an artistic point of view, I think, is quite different to research from a scientific point of view. First of all, because the vocation is different, and artistic research is not obliged to be scientifically sound, is not obliged, in my opinion at least, to arrive at some form of objectifiable or quantifiable truth. Within the space of artistic research, there's space for the imagination, there's space for fiction, there's space for speculation or speculative fictions. So of course I would argue that the or let's say poetic or the artistic license, the field of that possibility is much more open, and I think this is what makes it interesting, and this is where it diverges. So these are a few of my thoughts. Maybe a question I'd like to raise for the rest of the panel, also for you, Arjan, is that there seems to be no distinction made between academia and theory. I think there's a small distinction to be made there, particularly in relation to how we understand the notion of subjectivity, but perhaps we can talk about this conversation unfolds.
Maybe, Katerina, you could repeat your last sentence. You're breaking up a little bit and I didn't get the last sentence. So you talked about discerning academia and theory and subjectivity, and then you said something that I didn't get.
Yeah, no, I just sort of threw a question for the panel on the table because no distinction has been made between theory and academia to be made, particularly discuss questions of subjectivity within artistic practice.
Okay, thanks a lot. Florian, you raised your hand. If it's Still something there that you would like to add? Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I just would like to expand on a few aspects you have already mentioned. I mean, another thing to throw in is the advent or the rise of artistic PhDs in a way to academicize artistic practice. And I think, yeah, you can already with I don't know, a decade of two with that being provided at Goldsmith, for instance, it would develop its own aesthetics. So you can see in a film, okay, that comes from there very clearly. I think too that these research-based practices enriched artistic practice and also sort of cultural knowledge production to a great extent. And I think exactly as Katerina explained now, the great potential is in its subjectivity, in its openness, in the speculative potential, that it's not objectifiable, that it goes beyond scientific thinking. But there exactly lays the problem when it's about interdisciplinary collaboration, because I think these different methodologies often they don't match. And it's a great endeavor, great objective to be interdisciplinary and to bring scientists and artists together. And often in my experience, and I guess I'm sure Angelique can tell other examples, it's very hard to do. And maybe it's more on the institutional level than on the one-on-one relationship between a scientist and an artist who collaborate, and that is something that is really enriching for both, and especially for the spectators or for the audience. But on the institutional level, I'm going to talk a bit about a project I did 2 years ago where we worked together with other partners with the Botanical Museum in Berlin, coming from a political art association, also having as another partner a sort of activist gardening group. So that were really amazing different levels of institutions, and it created, I mean, it's a miracle that we managed to complete the project, but it was extremely hard. And just to find a common language in there was almost impossible. So there's a lot of obstacles, and I think I would like to just throw onto the table how to think about, or what everybody thinks about this development of artistic PhD as a sort of new value system to artistic practice as well. I think you hardly get any professorship anymore without presenting a PhD as artist. So autodidactic career gets more and more difficult. So how do we deal with that, or how do we want that to develop in the future? So that would be my question. But I think very refreshing is to think or to further explore and further develop what way did you choose to do to strengthen idiosyncratic approaches, to create your own scholarship, self-produce it, and yeah, throw that into the debates and theory and even in the academic field, and of course in the artistic, which is like all around that. Okay, thanks.
Super, thanks, Florian. And Wade, in the chat, you responded to what Katerina was saying. Maybe one question also that I would like you to respond to, and maybe then you can also address Katerina, is what, in your opinion, does it show that these kind of independent platforms, as you mentioned a few of them, as we can see in Doreen's work and the dark studies example that you gave, what does it tell us about the current and the existing traditional structures?
Well, to me, it's telling me that, you know, they're not working for everyone, you know, that the confinement and the categorization and the bureaucracy that is necessary to make those kinds of structures operate are not keeping up with the critical and urgent need for rapid response, critical engagement on the learner's terms, and not to say that I am, you know, anti-institution or academy. I'm not at all. I'm a graduate of UCL anthropology department. It's an incredible department that is really thinking in so many forward-thinking ways, but I mean, you know, there are so many people who don't come from privileged backgrounds who can't access that, or who are neurodiverse. You know, myself, I'm a neurodiverse person who was able to succeed in those environments, but not without struggle. So, you know, I think that, you know, I'm seeing a lot of this emerge from that. And I also think that a trend that I'm seeing more in both an artistic practice, you know, related to what others have been saying about collaborations between scientists and artists, are that the art of this moment that feels the most impactful and that is the most engaged is art that is very collaborative, it's very collective, it's very distributed, it involves a lot of different bodies and pieces, even in, you know, the spaces where of recognition and accolade. You know, I remember it was kind of a watershed moment when forensic architecture won the Turner Prize a few years ago, because that was so fascinating to see an artist group, not an individual, but a group that really is an academic group, kind of being brought into that arts award space that was traditionally given to painters. And so I think that that's just so emblematic of so many different things that are happening in the art world and in the academic world right now. And some of these alternative structures are being created in order to scaffold or make bridges between you know, where there are gaps in the system. And I can also speak to my involvement with the UCL Multimedia Anthropology Lab in London, based out of UCL Anthropology Department. You know, that group really came together because there was no space in the academy for us to experiment with technology in order, as it relates to our very rigorous ethnography-based research. And so, you know, we created this space to do things that were different and to kind of go outside, color outside of the lines, so to speak. And it's been difficult. I mean, it's been difficult for us to, you know, secure funding. It was difficult for the department to fully get on board with what we were doing because we were organized not in a traditional way. We don't have a traditional hierarchical structure to the way that the laboratory is organized. We don't have a defined academic output of a certain number of articles or whatnot per year. Our activities really unfold in the moment. They unfold in performances and in presentations and in exhibitions, in installations, in conversations. It's not all, you know, our output is not just, you know, something that can be strictly defined to, you know, what our academy had traditionally presented. And, you know, what we found is we just kind of pushed ahead and worked distributedly. There's about 30 or 40 of us across continents and countries and time zones who, you know, are part of this research network more globally, all kind of being centralized by some folks who are, you know, at the university. And we put on a major conference this year that was attended by over 2,000 people around the world. It was our biggest output ever, our biggest output that looked the closest to what you would traditionally expect from, you know, an academic department. And it just kind of really showed and proved to, I think, a lot of people that there are other, you know, we have to be rethinking the ways that we can organize, structure ourselves, and present ourselves, even within the academy and outside of it, because there's so much rich output that can come from these comminglings of theory and then the academic structure that supports it. But there's also other structures that support that kind of really rich theoretical, you know, engagement as well. And so I think that for me, it's all just testament to the fact that I'd ask, you know, those in charge and those who are writing the policy to, you know, come with an open mind and be open to different things than might be traditionally acceptable.
Sure. Doreen, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, and I just wanted to add to what Wade just said, that sometimes the time frame of, for instance, performing changes within, let's say, the program of a VA, they just take too long in order to keep up with what's going on out there. So a lot of these, let's say, alternative spaces, such as offsite project, for instance, like Wade said, like Antimateria and the academic resources area, it is there basically because we cannot keep up, or I cannot keep up with the conversation as a lecturer from within the structure of the institution, the way that I can from outside of it. So even though we might be able to reflect upon certain topics within, let's say, a very, I don't know, like a very established set of tools within academia, then again, we still need this raw material to be out there. So I think it's, let's say, an exchange of the possible ways of approaching building together, and especially learning together. So also when I think about, for instance, academia, I think that it is important to separate it as well from the notion of or the general notion of pedagogy, right? Because it's not the same, and learning is not necessarily academia, and a structure, a pedagogical structure, is not necessarily theoretical, for instance. So I think that when we have a look into this kind of conversation, that at least also from within other, let's say, artists run spaces, I think they have a very strong, or let's say generally speaking, there's a very strong sense of wanting to share knowledge, which is also learning together, but it's not necessarily going into the institutional structure in itself, because at some point it just does not work the way it should be working, right? So for instance, I think a lot about a project here in Mexico that's called Interspecifics, which is an artist collective, but also they have experimental pedagogy proposal. So they do have a series of workshops and a series of let's see, sharing spaces and learning spaces from within their own collective, and it's part of the raw material that they use to create artwork. So I think it is also interesting, especially when you think about sharing processes also from within the artistic world, how these structures seem to be much more close, let's say, from building an actual support from an artistic community or an cultural circuit that actually supports the creation and actually supports the artists. And I think it is very hard also for academia to keep up with the ways that we are, say, in a way, validating that something is better than other thing. That's something that I've always found very, very difficult from within art school, for instance. Maybe there is a case for, you know, saying that this particular lecture needs to end up with a series of, I don't know, like texts and an artwork and an exhibition and so forth. But then again, what is contained inside these spaces, I think it is very, very hard to evaluate in a way. So it's definitely something that is needed, you know, to have like a double thought about it. And even for me, coming from architecture, for instance, it was something that it was a very strong conversation there, because I remember you know, having my projects graded as in, oh, well, you know, your project is green and I don't like green, right? So sometimes it is just a case of saying, you know, maybe all of these structures are not playing the role they should be playing for actually supporting this creation, because they are not looking into what even outside of institution we feel is important. And that might not necessarily be the case everywhere, but I think these, let's say, these processes of slowing down the ways in which we adapt and which we adopt as well from within an academic institution as different set of tools that can actually allow us to get deeper into the conversation with students. I think that's also very, very problematic. So I think that in a way also these collaborations, interdisciplinary collaborations, help a lot. Or what I've seen is that even though of course they are super challenging, they help a lot also rethinking our structures. And if I can, you know, add up a piece of my very own experience, the last time that I applied for a PhD, my proposal was not successful because apparently the methodology was just way too all over the place. And and when I asked back, like, what does that mean? Like, in my head, it makes sense, you know, but I want to understand what does that mean for this particular institution. And they were like, oh, that's because you are trying to have a hybrid methodology where you are trying to create theoretical knowledge through practice-based methods. And I was like, but why does that not make sense? That's the way I am going to be able to gather data in order to analyze it and then afterwards put it into a theoretical framework, because I cannot have access to this information if I do not test it first. And that just didn't make sense within this particular department. And so for me, it was like, you know, I'd much rather move to a different institution than changing that methodology, because it doesn't make sense for me. Still, it hasn't made sense for anyone, but but myself. But well, you know, I think that that's also a conversation of saying how can we remain flexible and how can we adapt from within academia in order to, you know, build these fertile spaces of learning and thinking and researching, of course.
It makes me think of what Katerina, what you said about that art can allow itself to be subjective, and maybe the academia has to be more accountable, and that's maybe also part of the critique that you got, Doreen, like your method not being accepted. Katerina, do you also see that connection between what Doreen was telling?
Yes, I do. And I think I want to go back to the point that Florian made about artistic PhDs, because I think that connects very well to what Doreen just said. Florian, I don't know, when we talk about artistic PhDs, today we tend to think more and more about practice-based PhDs, right? And I think that's what you were referring to. Yes. So I think that a distinction also needs to be made between, you know, an academic PhD as we understand it in the traditional sense, you know, the thesis with the many footnotes that is between 80,000 and 1,000 words, which actually involves a very specific accumulative kind of theoretical research, and this practice-based artistic PhD, which is a different ballgame altogether. And perhaps this is, I think, what Doreen was also inferring to, that it's very difficult for somebody who comes from an academic field to understand how you can actually even exist within academia from a practice-based PhD. I think there's a discrepancy there, and Florian, I think, was very correct in pointing this out.
Anyone to respond? We also invite the participants, we're not yet in the Zoom yet, to if they have to say something to add, but I saw Paulien raising her hand. Go ahead, Paulien. You're still muted, Paulien.
I'm not completely up to date with every educational program on the level of artistic PhDs in the Netherlands or the world, but I think there's quite a lot to choose from. There are PhD programs that are really much focused on the artistic work, on the artwork, and there are PhDs that have a very elaborative and strong writing part, which really is similar to the traditional PhD. And in the Netherlands, it depends usually if it's connected to what university. For example, if you want to do your PhD at the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague, then you have to deal with Janneke Wesseling from the Academia of Leiden. And there are very specific levels of critique or whatever bars you have to hop over, and that's very different than when you're doing a PhD in Groningen, for example. So if you, and that's for you, Doreen, if you really feel strongly about your approach and you really believe in the way you want to do this, then sometimes it really can be worth looking for a professor who is more, you know, inclined to work with you on your standards and where you start from, instead of you trying to bend towards a certain academic regime. That, because I've seen more artists and curators really getting out of academia fully disappointed because they were not able, or they didn't want to make this turn towards a completely different way of working. But I think there's more and more freedom. It's opening up more in different departments. That was what I was thinking.
I'd like to add to that what Paulien is saying and what Florian also sort of mentioned is that it's a very stick to the person. So if it's a professor that does really want to do it, then it works. And the same goes for scientists collaborating with artists. That is also a very personal thing. Some of them are really opening up and really interested and want to speak or want to find the common ground and share their knowledge and get the knowledge of the artist involved in their practice because they see it's enriching. But the institutions are hell. So if you can go beyond the institution and if you can find like the professor or the scientist or whoever you really want to work with, and you can convince them to do so, then usually the collaborations work really well. I do also think that's another thing what Florian was saying about the artistic PhDs. I know quite a few people who are trying to do it or doing it. And what I often see is that they either lose their real practice. So they focus on the practice they had and try and do their PhD on the basis of that, but then turn to the academia more than that and lose their practice a lot. So hopefully that's not what will happen to you, Doreen, but it sounds not. Sounds like you're really guarding your practice, but that's what I see happening. And I do think that in Germany, the demand for a PhD is higher than in the Netherlands, also because it's really like not that long a practice in the Netherlands to do these kinds of artistic PhDs. But I see it happening that it will go the same direction here. So I don't know. I mean, it does differ quite a bit from country to country still, I think, even though I also don't have a full scope of it yet.
Sounds like a good area of research in its own to get an overview how this is developing.
Super. Anyone in yeah, Katerina, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on something that Wade said. You mentioned that you used the word knowledge, and I think to me this is one of the most interesting things that's been happening in artistic practice in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, is the capacity for art to actually produce knowledge, the whole question of knowledge production. And I want to add to what you said, Wade, because you said that you found that collaborative and collective structures are what yield, let's say, some of the most interesting art today. To me, it's actually the artists who are, be they individuals or whether they work and collaboratively, it's those artists who are actually contributing to the enrichment of knowledge production today. And particularly, I find this important when both the political discourse and the media discourse is becoming increasingly polarized. So the nuances and the complexities that one would archetypally find, let's say, in the academic world are filtering through to the artistic world. And I find this one of the most interesting developments. The other thing I want to add is where do they actually touch? Where they touch, and this is, I think, also a very political issue, is in how histories are rewritten. The whole question of post-colonialism, decolonization, sort of gender politics, alternative discourses, and the rewriting, or rather the new historiographies that are emerging, which I call correctional historiographies, are very much based on research that has already been done in the academic field. So, for example, there probably would be no Black Lives Matter and decolonization if, Stuart Hall wasn't already active in the academic field and in the field of cultural studies in the 1980s, and many, many people like that. So I think this is another point to make. And finally, I think it's really interesting to revisit trends that have, I think, come to the fore in the last, let's say, 10 years the so-called ethnographic turn, or the so-called archival turn, or I remember that article that was written a couple of years ago by Dieter Ruhlstraat called The Way looking into archaeological research in art. And these are all things that are related to academia and have, I think, enriched artistic practices very considerably.
Thank you, Katerina. Barbara, you have raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this notion of subjectivity that Katerina, you mentioned in relation to artistic research and the arts. I think as far as I have kind of like come across, I think that also in these classical academic areas that the question, like this myth of objectivity is being questioned also, so that you know, we tend to have this this understanding that all of these academic, like strictly academic disciplines are very objective, but this as such is already being questioned within academia. I think that's something that you need to keep in mind in a way, and I think that it'd be interesting to see if these very strict academic disciplines are also moving away from their kind of shells, because it seems that, you know, staying within their own disciplines protects them and kind of also ensures their financial survival. So it'd be interesting to see whether this will change within the coming years. That's just a comment.
No, absolutely. Just to add on to what you're saying, Barbara, I think that that's something that in my discipline in anthropology is extremely a really strong thread of conversation right now, and something that, you know, is on the tip of everyone's tongue. You know, following from the scholarship from Eduardo Viveros de Castro and others about surrounding the ontological turn over the past 10 years and how that's shaped anthropology, you know, that's really the biggest debate is, you know, how do we get closer to our subjects? How do we understand these different ontologies, understanding that we can never be objective, we can never, you know, position ourselves in any other way. This is how, you know, we're coming at this and how it's being framed. And so but it's interesting, you know, how volatile those conversations become and how, you know, intense the debate is kind of on both sides surrounding this idea of an ontological positioning. But I think that this is a debate that, while I think, you know, is certainly, you know, is extremely volatile in the anthropological world, I see it as being so relevant for every other discipline too, as we kind of come to grips with the idea that, you know, we can't solve anything if we stay in our silos. And I think that speaks to what I was saying before related to collective practice and collaborative practice, because what a lot of, let me give you a case study actually as a better example. I work a lot with a group called Kaken. They're an artist group based in the UK. I think Doreen is familiar with them too and has worked with them in the past. And they're a group of 3 core artists, but they extend their arms outwards and envelop other people in the group depending on what needs that they may have for a particular moment. So some of them are more academic focused and really thinking about the research behind the virtual worlds that they're making. Others are doing the design, the hard engineering and the coding that is actually able to build the infrastructures that allow them to express themselves. Others are the thinkers who are, you know, really kind of grappling with you know, the concepts and kind of the artistic direction of the project. So all of that to say that it takes, you know, kind of a village, you know, to get that holistic view. You need people who come from different places and who have completely different views than you do, who come from completely different academic backgrounds than you do, in order to get the full picture. And I think that we're seeing the projects that are the most exciting for audiences, at least the ones that are most exciting to me, you know, give that real holism. They really give you that big picture look at an issue, you know, on both a macro level and a micro level, on, you know, in different areas or aspects. And that is something that I'm hoping that we're trying to do at the UCL Multimedia Anthropology Lab. We're constantly trying to partner with the Computer Sciences Department and the Slade School of Fine Art, you know, because we realize that here, if we sit in our little anthropological corner, you know, we'll be here writing our ethnographies and the world will just go by. And it needs to be embedded in a more I think rigorous and inclusive social practice.
Thank you, Wade. There's someone who wants to add something to this. We could also move to the chat box of the YouTube stream, because there's some questions coming in from there. Actually, one of the audience members, Ana Ruiz Valencia, would like to go back to Katerina, what you said in the afternoon presentations. And the question is that she's writing here, I would be very happy to know the panelists' idea around this notion, how you define space, both, oh no, sorry, I have to start here. Something that was pointed out earlier was about the formats, how the exhibition format seems to not be enough anymore for curatorial practice. And I think, Katerina, it's a question, or at least a tendency that you wanted to point out and hear other speakers' opinion about. I think Ade in a kind responded to that already, but maybe this is something that we could now share with the group, like how this idea of the exhibition is changing its value, maybe for a lot of curators. An exhibition as, maybe, I guess, Katerina, you would define it as a traditional museum kind of space exhibition, compared to something that is more virtual or maybe more part of other realms of society. Maybe you expand a bit to that, and then other people can respond.
Yeah, for me, the exhibition, it does not necessarily have to be in a museum. It can be in different spaces, different manifestations. It can be a biennial. It can be, and I do consider exhibition making in the digital space also as exhibitions, but they are virtual. They are not physical. So when I talk about the exhibition, I mean the exhibition that contains objects, experiences, performances, things that need to be experienced physically. So it's not necessarily only three-dimensional artworks, installation, film, video. It's things that need to be experienced sensorially with a human body present in the space. And I'd like to advocate for this, kind of exhibition practice, because I think while everything around it is super important, process is important, research is important, collaboration is important, outreach is important, education is important, public programs are important, inclusivity is important. All of these things are very important. However, I still consider the exhibition, for me, and this is why I can still call myself a curator, something which I also I'm very skeptical of as a term nowadays. Let's even say that I would consider myself an exhibition maker, because I love working with artists and I love helping them to realize their ideas in whatever medium, be it new media, be it traditional media. But I do believe very much in the power of the exhibition to speak. I believe in the power of the artist to speak. And I think that somehow we feel that this is not enough in the art world at the moment. And luckily in the new media world, the exhibition has been somewhat dematerialized, and of course with COVID much more. But it was very interesting to me to hear today the keynote lecture, where I heard actually nothing about art whatsoever, and I heard nothing whatsoever about Documenta as an exhibition, because you do have to deliver an exhibition project. Perhaps it was too early, but somehow I feel that we are, let me put it this way, I'm going to play devil's advocate. We are constantly talking about reinventing the exhibition or, dematerializing the exhibition, but as yet, I haven't seen something that has come to replace it that is better or more powerful as a form of communication, or as a form of, let's say, how to communicate artistic practice in the plural.
Thanks. That's a firm statement, and I'm very curious to hear other people's responses. And Florian is the first to raise his hand. Go ahead, Florian.
Oh, I think it's a very strong and intriguing statement, and I think you're really right, Katerina. And but I think, and that's maybe also directed to institutions more than to the individual exhibition makers that are often then part of the institution or collaborate with them, then the homework needs to be done as well. That means the homework to mediate, to communicate the exhibition, to create accessibility, because that's the big discussion I feel is like who has access, who will be able, who is addressed by exhibitions. And there, of course, there's always this common critique. Okay, it's something super advanced, progressive, but it remains in the art world bubble. And for the general audience, it's inaccessible, ununderstandable, too academic, too demanding too much of knowledge you bring with yourself in order to decipher all the languages and codes and aesthetics and so forth of the artworks presented, especially when they are research based and so on. So it's a challenge. I think it's great to tackle that. It's extremely important, as you say, like the artist has a voice. It's independent, idiosyncratic perspective on political, social, whatsoever debates is extremely important, enriching for everybody, and something that needs to be taken very serious. And so we are in a moment of crisis as well, where culture was the first to close down and the last to open up, at least here in Germany. But yeah, like a concrete point, and I've been collaborating, I'm going to present tomorrow with Tabacalera in San Sebastian. It's a big cultural center with free access to the exhibition. So that was very helpful for my film-based exhibition there, where people can go in and out. They can come back. They don't pay €16 entrance fee as you do in many museums that are also public funded. So this is something what I don't understand then, that these obstacles need to be put in this way, and we have to much more or fight for in this understanding of culture in general, but also of exhibition institutions to be part of a common property, part of a common good of any society, and that needs to maintain a high degree of accessibility and a program of mediation as well, because I think that's the great moments. What I also experience in Tabacalera is if you are very innovative and inventive in your pedagogical program, that is something that is very enriching for an audience, and also generates new audiences, and not necessarily the common and the usual suspect ones. So yeah, I stop here.
Thanks. Doreen raised her hand. Go ahead. You're still muted, Doreen.
Sorry, I just wanted to add up to the conversation about mediation, because I also think that is crucial for the exhibition in itself. So probably the way that I see it is, if you can mediate new audiences, particularly new audiences, into at least having a starting point for the exhibition, I think that just makes the exhibition run much more smoothly. And I think I just want to go back a little bit to what I said on my presentation earlier, and that is that at least for me at the Digital Culture Center, it is very strange, and it's very hard not to have the opportunity to have people jump in the exhibition space, even if they are not there for the exhibition. Then again, probably that is, can I say, that is in a way something that happens also because the space is open and free for all. So yeah, then again, this accessibility expands into a different area that I'm very much aware that is not something that's possible for all of the institutions, but definitely that's something that, at least for me as a curator, has helped build the strategies that I can put into place in order for people to actually access the exhibition. Because in a way, yeah, that's my goal, right? It's not only giving a space for the conversation from within this, let's say, circuit that is already part of my regular audience, but to expand that into other places. And then again, we can start talking a little bit about the role of the curator as well here, right? Because for me, it is, of course, very important what comes into actually developing the exhibition, but then also how I'm going to communicate that, I think, is also part of my responsibility, especially in a space where a lot of people is not necessarily going inside of the physical building because of the exhibition. So how can I make them stay, or how can I make them at least, you know, wander around a bit? And I think that is part of the strategy of the whole exhibition in itself, and not necessarily, you know, something that expands into an extra program. I mean, which we of course have, and we of course think it's very interesting. But I don't know, I think for me, it's probably an architectural gesture. But then again, probably it's just because we do have like this physical space that we kind of play around with. I know, and we can expand probably on that idea as well, you know, like what's the role of the curator within the mediation of the exhibition in itself?
Well, something that I can add to this conversation, because I know, Katerina, I totally feel your frustration, I think, in terms of the missing bodies in space, experiencing things with other bodies moment. I mean, it's something that is so core to who we are, and that I'm missing too so much. But the thing that and to speak to what Doreen is saying in terms of mediation and the curatorial, you know, responsibility towards mediation, is that, like, I always think in terms of nativity, right? So I'm thinking about, like, this is the environment that I have. These are the tools that I have. This is the space that we have. We either have really wide open public space, you know, where there's distance, literal physical distance between us, but we can still be in the same geolocation, or we have the internet. And I'm trying to find in my own curatorial practice those points where those different spheres either meet, or where I can use the native material affordances of the digital to make a kind of experience that could only be experienced there. So if we're going to be using the digital and we can't do this in-person thing, you know, I am hoping that instead of like begrudging it and trying to transform something and trying to drag something physical into the digital that doesn't really want to be there in the first place, I'm trying to think about, like, what is native to this space and what makes the most sense here? Like, how do I use the affordances of the screen and of the software that's running on my screen to make something that, you know, really hits home, that is the kind of thing that can only happen in this very intimate space? Because, right, like, we have, you know, to our great advantage, we do have the intimacy that the screen provides, right? Like, our desktop is such an extension of our psyche. So, like, how can we do things in this space, maybe not only on a curatorial level, but also on an academic level, that really, like, kind of gets through and gets past into the viewer sitting on the other side? And there's an example that I always bring up, and I'm going to talk about this more in my talk tomorrow, so I don't mean to speak too long on this, but there's an artist named Porpentine Charity Hartscape, who's a transgender artist based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And in 2017, her work was included in the Whitney Biennial in New York City. And I've been a big fan of this artist, and she makes interactive hypertext game pieces. They're all available for free online. You can go check them out right now. There's one that's called With Those We Love Alive that absolutely changed my life. But the thing was, these works, which are meant to be on the browser, when we went to the physical space of the Whitney Museum, it was like so out of context. All of the meaning of those works was totally stripped away, to the point where having a physical experience actually, like, was a denigration to that piece. And I think that Porpentine said in an art forum interview, I think it was with Jennifer Chan, I can't remember, she said, my games are meant to be played alone in your bedroom, under the covers, on a shitty laptop, like, quote unquote shitty laptop, you know, holed up and reclusive. And, you know, it was like, that really blew my mind, because I was like, wow, like, you're not thinking about creating work for the White Cube or creating work for the Academy. You're creating work for here, for this moment right now that we're in. And that just, like, sparked so much creativity to me, and sparked so much thinking, and made me, you know, really think about, like, okay, like, I've been so focused on bringing this other thing into the digital and trying to make it work here and trying to replicate something that already existed, when instead I wasn't looking at all of the new possibilities, all the forms that were different or unexpected that I hadn't, yet come into counter with. So I don't know, that's something that I think about and that I'm hoping that is helping me stay positive in the midst of a loss of so much else.
Yeah, I think that what you just said is a distinction that needs to be made, actually. Yeah, things are context specific. So, and actually the one does not exclude the other. But I just want to make a little experiment here. Raise their hands, those of the coaches who are over 40. Am I the...
I think it's 4-2.
Why I'm saying this is because I think that, and I hate to say this because I'm also following what is happening on the internet. I'm looking at post-internet artists. I'm looking at new media practices, all of that. But could it be that this might also be a generational thing? I say this because I still believe in the primacy of the physical experience. And wait, yes, you sense my frustration very, very well, because I am really tired of looking at exhibitions, particularly in the post-COVID era. In the beginning, I was super enthusiastic, but there's something, there's something missing. There's something missing. It's like food without salt and pepper. That I'm back in Brussels now, and I feel so happy that I can actually go back to the museum, and I can go to artist-run spaces, and I can go to galleries, and I can look at art, and maybe that I feel there's just too much time being spent behind the screen. And that's not to say that there aren't interesting things happening in the screen, but somehow as a curator, I want to argue for the importance of the exhibition itself, without not taking into consideration all these things that we were talking about, like accessibility, inclusivity, but it's the exhibition that to me is the platform from which all of these other questions arise and come and somehow, create an additional framework to it. And please feel free to disagree with me.
No, I don't disagree at all. But one thing I would add is that I think an exciting possibility for the future in this space is hybrid exhibitions that have physical components and spaces that people can go in and really rigorous curation, kind of augmented with a digital component that either sits sister to or it complements in some way what's happening physically. Because I think that, like, for me, the most exciting thing about all of this is this whole, I mean, this is going to sound so terrible, but if one good thing came from such a dark year, it was that I think people finally understood how valuable the access point of the digital has become for people. And I don't, in my office, in my day job, we will never, from this moment on, stop having hybrid events, even after, everything is completely back and open, because our viewership of the numbers that we're getting through the door for our events is just skyrocketed, because people don't want to come and drive even 30 minutes to come in to one of our talks or events, but they're happy to stay in their offices and dial in from a computer. So I think that, like, this is not like an either or situation. It's totally a both and to me. Like, we're now, like, rather, it's not a different access point, it's just more access points. And that is super exciting to me.
Super. There were now even 3 hands raised. Paul a while ago, not raised hand anymore. Mario and Pauline. Paul, raise your hand again, or we'll just jump to Mario. Mario, go ahead, and then Pauline.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for all what you said was part of me in a way, because I got my PhD as a part of continuing my artistic practice. So I really, I was really involved on what you were saying. So What I think that we are really facing as a kind of humans in this era, is about that the internet is not made for our bodies. So what we are going to face when all of this is gonna end or evolve in unexpected ways is that our body would have learned something about connecting through our eyes in a very general and probably different way of what we expect. And I don't know, I think that we are really facing also what Bolter and Grusin addressed as remediation back in the late 90s, where we are facing that all our mediums, our spatial mediums, mediums based on space, are trying in evolving in a form remediated inside the digital. And this gives us also probably a kind of a framework to address our endeavors, our future endeavors in creating cultural offers in the digital space.
Thank you. Paulien?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Katerina's, well, almost a rant against the online world. For me, as a curator, as a researcher, but also just as a human being, for me is the exhibition or the artwork always just one point in time in a very long line of steps that are, for me, sometimes maybe even more interesting than the final moment of exposition. For example, I don't go to exhibitions that much. I spend more time researching. You know, I see something somewhere, or someone maybe mentioned something to me, and then I start searching online, and I see videos, I see talks, I see connections. I talk to friends about this, and then this whole body of knowledge that is surrounding a single art piece. An art piece is just a reason to talk about something. But the real thing is not the artwork. The real thing is where the artwork is about. And that can be traced anywhere in other artworks, in other exhibitions, in other platforms. And for us now in Corona times, the internet, we are more than anywhere else. But somehow I don't feel that much difference, because the main threats, the things I'm interested in, the things I'm worried about, I still can, you know, connect with people surrounding about certain topics, and this exhibition is just one of the many forms to communicate, and it's an essential form because somehow it's the reason of existence, and that's why we are all maybe a kind of shocked by this whole new NFT discussion. Like, whoa, is there a new kid on the block? How important is this kid? How big is his mouth? Will he be around for long, or what happens here? But the idea that the exhibition is the only thing that matters, for me, that's not the case.
I didn't say, Paulien, I didn't say that the exhibition is the only thing that matters, and it was not a rant against media art in any way, because I'm involved in media art myself.
I did not say that you were a rant against media art, but against
yeah. Say that
no,
I granted it. No, but what I wanted to say is that we need to make a distinction, and the very same way, and I think all curators, and this distinction needs to be made, is of course we surf the internet, of course we discuss on platforms, of course we have online discussions, of course you look at something and then you go and you research it and you discuss it online. But my question to you is, for example, you see the work of an artist online. Do you not want to then meet that artist? Do you not want to go to their studios, if they have a studio, or if they don't have a studio? Do you not want to meet them in real life and actually look at what they have to show you on their computer? And then if they are active in the physical sphere, do you not want to go out of your house and see where they're going to exhibit and actually interact in a physical way, which is also, the body and the mind are not separate. They are one. Ancient Greeks said that a long time ago. So these are all very different things and very different registers of experience. My argument is that as a curator, my definition of a curator is something
Katerina, you're breaking up big time. And now she has even totally disappeared. But let's hope that she's coming back. And meanwhile, we could jump to
She's
Kate.
back.
Am I back?
Yeah, but we lost you for like.
Yeah, so it's okay. I'll be very short. I want to go back to what Mario said, actually, which is that I think he said it better than how I was trying to say it, is that our body is not made for the internet. I think, Mario, you said it very, very well. And I think going back to what Wade said, we have to consider each context differently and separately. And I think Wade's point about going to a museum and seeing something that was made for the internet is an equally valid point. Context is very specific. So I'm just advocating for the physical experience of spectatorship of art. That I want to just stress that because there's just we've been imprisoned behind our computers for far too long, in my opinion.
What I would like to add is that maybe it's not only that the body is not made for the digital, or the digital is not made for our bodies, but that we are at the point that we need to find a way to connect these two realms. And that's what we're doing within exhibitions, and that's what we're doing online. But this little screen is still limiting. It's limiting our connections to a lot of things and to a lot of our sensory experience. That's what we try to do with this Real Feelings exhibition, where Sherry Turkle kind of says, like, if you put everything into the digital, it becomes data. It reads our emotions as data, as a system, and it's so much richer and more layered and more complex than this and even probably like quantum computers can still not really access this whole thing because it's messy. Our bodies are messy, and the digital is very unmessy. It's like zeros and ones still. And even when we go steps further, it will take, I think, a lot of time before these two worlds, this messy world of our bodies and our experiences and our emotions, come close to what the digital does. Even though it looks like it's real, it's still not real. All that we see is it's still translated in a way that an exhibition where you walk through, where you experience your own body and your connectedness to other elements and other materials and the space itself and the sounds that come from afar and the smell you have, it's so much more complex and enriching that, of course, that is different. And you cannot reach that in the digital yet, but we're trying to.
I would totally disagree. We can reach that in the digital. There are amazing examples of virtual reality works that do just that. And I think that, like, I don't know, I just think that, in these, like, I just want to push back against what you said about it not being real, because if I'm referring to anthropologist Tom Belsdorf, who has done extensive, ethnographic research within Second Life and other various virtual worlds, the virtual is real. It's real that I'm talking to you. It's real that we're here and things are happening. And I think that, like, a more useful delineation is to think about, like, the differently constituted material experience. Like, we have a physical material experience and we have a virtual material experience. And, I think it goes back to saying, like, of course, like, nothing's ever gonna be, just the other day, I went to see a sculpture in San Francisco. It's this huge Olafur Eliasson, these big metal orbs that are mirrored, and you stand in the middle of them and you look around and you have, like, all of these reflections of the water. It's right by the pier in San Francisco. And, nothing would ever, take away the wind on my face on the city corner and the light reflecting off of those spheres and hitting me in the eye and feeling the warmth of it. And, like, just standing there and being with these objects like that, will never change. But I do think that we can have just as enriching experiences that are just constituted differently.
But I agree with you on that. And it's the lack of words and the lack of language that we have. You're a step ahead of me, maybe, in how to.
I don't know if that's true.
No, but I think that's what we're experiencing, and that is the interesting time that we live in and that we are researching. And I think as artists and curators, we are in the middle of all this, which is, of course, a good place to be, I would say.
I think like to hybrid proposals. Yes, I think, well, I think from my side, from what I could share today with you, it's, for me, it's very important to have this dual, let's say, cyclic, hybrid, the structure of working with both, because I too agree that we need to reconnect with outside spaces, but then also outside means outside of the gallery space, outside of the museum, outside. So, I mean, of course, it's a challenge, a really big challenge, but I think there's also ways of making that happen. I mean, I'm not sure if I've been able to do that successfully each time, but I think that it is definitely an area of opportunity.
Doreen, not to cut you off, but I have a great example of this exactly that I think is a really good one. And this also speaks to what I was talking to you earlier about, you know, research and curatorial work that's happening outside of an academic context too. There's a fabulous project in the United States. It's called Final Hot Desert. It's run by a brilliant curator named Ben Sang. And basically what he does is he takes these unbelievable, like post-human, like cyberpunk sculptures and takes them out to random locations out in the Utah desert and installs them out in the desert in these, like, there, you know, no structure, no human construction in sight. It's just these really raw natural landscapes. And then he photographs them really, you know, artistically, creatively, getting the best angles, really interesting ways of playing with the you know, the volume and the shape of the landscape. And then they recirculates those images online. So there's this really interesting and beautiful experience where, you know, there's a physical installation that's completely outside of any kind of institutional structure, that you only get the work and the landscape and the curator's vision. But then on top of it, there's this really interesting digital experience that you get, that even though you're just looking at still images, you're looking at still images that were made with the express purpose of being digital artifacts and documentation and portals into the show. So what ultimately arises is a really great hybrid experience that is lo-fi, really low cost to everyone to produce. You know, he has his camera and, you know, any kind of shipping cost or gas cost to drive out to the desert and put the artworks up, but overall really low cost and really, really high points of access. You know, anybody can go out to these, you know, remote locations and be with the work in public nature space, or anyone can go and check out the images online, and it doesn't require a hefty download, any kind of 3D software. It's just easy. And so that, I mean, to me, is a really, really exciting example of some of the possibilities that are made possible when we can think about curation as, you know, existing across those different boundaries.
Thanks a lot. I'm wondering a bit if the fact if a curator has a moving virtual background says something about the position in this discussion. I think it could. There's a discussion there's a question from the YouTube chat that again draws back our attention to what Ade said. And I think Patricia Wojciechowska is making a good point by saying that isn't that Ade was trying to say that there are different cosmologies. Exhibition itself is very much a Western concept, and Lumbung, the concept that Ade and Ruang Rupa are using for the upcoming documenta, is a different approach to an art presentation. Is that something that maybe it changes the responses so far? I'm curious. At least I wanted to point it out that this is something that Ade, I think, was trying to explain. Anyone to respond to that?
I don't know who asked this question, but I would agree that the exhibition is a Western concept. But I'd also like to ask the person who asked the question to elaborate on this. Because the implication is that because it's a Western concept, little bit of a problem with that. I was actually very interested in what Ade said. And I do agree that the methodologies that they're undertaking, which are not new, in fact, they have been done before, in other exhibitions are definitely interesting new models to pursue. But let's talk about the exhibition as a Western concept. I mean, I think this is very, very interesting because, you know, to me, yes, it is. But even, let's say, even the Global South, or even different other countries, even countries that are engaged in post-colonial critique and decolonization, they are also making exhibitions. And it's the content of those exhibitions, I think, that is important. It's the politics of these exhibitions that is important. It's the understanding of the politics of representation that are more important than the actual exhibition itself. This is what I believe we need to be talking about.
Who agrees that this definition of exhibitions as a Western concept and the importance of being of the content of those exhibitions? Anyone to respond, maybe?
I can add a short note, as I think that what they're maybe referring to, on top of just exhibiting, I think, is the very colonial, you know, kind of idea of collection, of a museum collection, of putting, you know, exotic items in a box from far away and displaying them. And, you know, I think that, like, while I'm no expert on the topic, I think that at the end of the day, like, what new forms and what this moment is really showing us is that grassroots ways of organizing and coming together are quickly becoming more and more viable options for folks who are traditionally excluded. And, you know, and I also firmly believe that they can be used as decolonial strategy. I've been seeing the example of Black Beyond, which is a New York-based Black arts group that is actively working to do this, of Skawanati and the Abtech, the virtual indigenous space in Second Life, where they're using community curation and community-led, you know, and this community-led initiative to build a world outside of any kind of colonial control. So, you know, I think that that while I maybe don't have an answer for how we might completely dismantle those concepts or even be able to adequately describe the extent of their harm, what I can point to is the fact that there are so many different pathways available now to work to deconstruct those notions. And I'm so sorry about this. It's 12:30 here, and I know this panel is running a little over. I have to go, but it was really fascinating to speak with all of you. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to chatting with you all again tomorrow.
Super, great that you're here. See you tomorrow, Wade. Kate, you raised your hand. Can't find you anymore in the grid, but please go ahead. Yeah.
Hi. I was just kind of thinking about going back to the conversation about academic versus artistic research and sort of trying to bring that into what we were currently talking about with the exhibition. And I've been thinking a lot about how artistic research allows for failure in a way that academic research doesn't necessarily. And that failure in itself, like Jack Halper, I'm thinking about Jack Halberstam when I'm thinking about failure. So failure as a decolonization strategy. So I personally love ideas of failure. And so I think that artistic research allows you to sort of bump into corners and to fail in going down different pathways that, you know, working within an institution, I also received my MA in curatorial practice, so I can definitely speak to the academization of this. Yeah, I was thinking a lot about failure, and then also how the exhibition doesn't necessarily, I'm seeing more and more exhibitions where moments of failure are celebrated, but the exhibition is kind of always the final product of a process. And so I like this sort of move to towards this hybrid model that we've been speaking of, in a way to maybe embrace models of failure as a strategy of decolonization.
We are running towards the end.
Sorry.
We're running towards the end. Pauline already also is leaving us, but let's go ahead a little bit more. Doreen, listen to your response, and then maybe we can end it more informally with a after drink, quote unquote, in the Zoom. But please go ahead, Doreen.
So I was just going to say that well, failure is important as well. You cannot really restructure anything if you do not face the possibility of failure within the experimental. And I think that is something that is necessary. And even though we do not frame it like that, I think in a way thinking about these hybrid structures that are not, let's say, placed within a certain set of rules or within a certain methodology that you can just replicate and get a, let's say, good result each time. It always aims for talking about failure. So yes, I think, I mean, for me, it is important to also share, you know, where things haven't gone the way that I've planned, because it is in that moment of having to take a decision right there and then, you know, that you actually discover other possibilities of the, let's say, exhibition or of the artwork or of the, you know, research or whatever you're going into. So I think maybe we do not frame it or do not name it as such, say, as we should. And I think a lot about, you know, all this notion of glitch and how, you know, let's say 10 or so years ago, talking about the last bit of the human hand within a digital structure was glitch, right? Like watching something fail, especially something that is programmed not to. So being evident about something that fails, I think it is important, especially when you have systems that try to cover that up, whether that be with other words, whether that be with a blue screen, whether that be, you know, with a lot of other things that do not allow us to classify something as a failure. So I think we should start naming that in a much more clear way. I think that would allow us to have other kind of conversations as well.
Thanks, Tuto, you raised your hand. Let's move towards the end of the public part of this panel and then say goodbye to our online audience on YouTube, and we can continue a bit more in the chat here in the Zoom. Tuto, maybe up to you for a last remark or question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would love to continue more to talk about failure. So I'll just say that I hope that continues. As someone who has worked in museums heavily with electronics that do fail, when they do, there's often a very quick panic to sort of preserve and to quickly reformat something for presentation. And in a sort of, I guess, obviously contradictory sense, that media that is placed on a hard drive that is potentially quite everlasting can sort of vanish very quickly. And yeah, I'm just curious to sort of explore that idea more with how we allow time-based media to fail and potentially, yeah, how we start to name that failure.
Just make me think of, we had 2 days ago an event on the NFTs, and someone said NFTs will be there forever. So no glitches there, but we'll find out if that's true. Anyone else to comment on Tuto's words? If not, we could close this public part of the conference. We invite you all to join us again tomorrow. The program is on our website. We hope to see you again with more presentations by our curators. And those in the Zoom, I invite you to stay for a bit of an informal after talk before we all continue our days or go to sleep. So thanks for joining us in the YouTube stream. Hope to see you tomorrow. We are off the air now in the YouTube stream. Goodbye.